Hey everyone. Today I'm joined by Gary Horsfield. Gary is currently Global Chief Supply Chain Officer with Berke and has previously held senior leadership positions with the likes of PepsiCo, Kellogg's, and William Grant& and Sons. Gary, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Sam.
It's really, really great to have you on, and I appreciate you taking the time. I guess a good starting point, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself and your career journey?
Yeah, I mean, kind of English, obviously, as you can tell by the accent, hopefully. But I've had the pleasure of running supply chains around the world and living around the world. So I went from the UK to Australia, from Australia to Asia, and then back across to Europe. And I currently reside in Athens, Greece. So, and during that time, I've worked for some, I guess, amazing businesses with amazing brands and amazing people. Through Mars, PepsiCo, Kellogg, Mead Johnson, now Ricky Benkiza, and then alcohol. So with William Grant and Sons, so brands like Glenfiddich and Hendrick's Gin. Then actually did a stint with the British government during COVID, and recovering the PPE cell during the crisis, which was a super experience and not one you normally expect to do within your career, but unusual times for everybody. And now I work for Berke, so and I actually do two roles. So I look after the global supply chain, but I also look, which includes R&D and innovation, but I also look after the shaver category. So the global shaver business for Berke, which is for me a super continuation of the journey into from supply chain to business, which is great to be able to do.
Fantastic. Could you tell me, throughout your career, what was some of the most important advice you were personally given by mentors throughout?
I tell a story of a guy called Rich Delaney who used to run Pepsi International Supply Chain. And he always used to do a thing when he went in a room, when he visited a plant, and he'd put his phone down and he'd say, I'm only going to answer it for two people. One is my wife, because she never phones, so it must be an emergency. And the second one is my secretary, because she knows where I am, she knows I don't want to be disturbed, so it must be important. And the message I took from that is, you've got to be in the room, right? So wherever you are as a leader, you're being watched, you're being looked at, and to be present is hugely impactful on the people that you're with. It gets harder and harder now with phones and messages going all the time, but it's the one takeaway that I always have is, be here now. And it's something I say to my team when we're together, if it's something really important, okay, leave the room, do what you need to do and come back in. But when you're in the room as a leader, be there, and be impactful. Don't be half there. And I think that is probably, from a leadership perspective, one of the most powerful things I've carried through. I then think there's a couple of other things, and they're a bit cliche, but I do think they're true, right? One is it's a journey, not a sprint. And I've gone through, it's interesting, my children are now kind of mid-20s. So I say the same thing to them, but I mean, they don't listen, right? So when you're younger, it's a sprint and I want to get here now and here now and here now. But the reality is, if you make it a journey, then you continue to plan forward instead of set yourself short-term goals. And you think about anything you do in life, it is very much about where are you going? Where do you want to be? It's not about just the next step and the next step. So I think that's one. And then lastly, the third one is enjoy it, right? Because it is a journey. And I think if you enjoy it, and the best leaders I've worked for are the leaders that appear to have 8 days in a week or 26 hours in a day. They have time, right? And part of that, I think, is because you enjoy what you do, you have much more balance. And all three are linked, right? Because if you're not rushing, if you have time, if you're enjoying it, and if you're there and present, you would come across as a leader much more powerful and much more impactful on the people that work for you than those that are racing by and chasing the next hurdle and really not enjoying the moment. It's pretty obvious, right? So I try and live by that, and I think as you get more comfortable as a leader, that becomes more obvious in terms of your capability.
No, fantastic. Some really, really good advice. Gary, I'd love to touch on something you mentioned earlier about your own career journey. Obviously, you've spent quite a lot of time out in the sort of Asia Pacific region,
Yeah.
sort of in your earlier career, and you know, now that you're in this global role overseeing the global supply chain, how do you feel that that experience has helped you to step into that?
I think well, we created a vision here, which is globally leveraged, regionally focused, with local execution. And I guess as you move around the world and work with different teams, you recognize that in supply chain, the delivery really is local. And that solution is often very different from, Asia to North America to Europe, even down to different countries, different retailers, for instance, in most of the industries I've been in. So whilst you can run a much higher level, you have to always bring it down to that local execution, because our job is to put things on the shelf. And that solution to go on the shelf has to be at a local level and work in the local environment. And then lastly, I always say again, back to the earlier answer to the question, we're some of the biggest people leaders in any business. Often we carry at least half the cost of the business as well as half the people. The way in which you lead your people does change across cultures. Your values don't change as a business, the way in which you want to treat people, but the way in which you lead and the way in which you communicate and connect to has to be able to adjust to local, I guess, local engagement requirements, right? It is often very different, and your behavior as a leader needs to be slightly different in different places. So I think the journey creates flexibility in your style, right? And you definitely realize as you move around the world that one solution doesn't fit all. So it's super powerful. Plus the fact that I've always wanted to travel. So the beauty about our job is if you don't like traveling, don't be in supply chain. But if you do, it's a great role that allows you to meet people from all walks of life. I mean, I've done agronomy, so you step outside some of the major cities and really see parts of the world that many people don't get to see. But you do get to connect globally with many different people and many different cultures, and it's a super part of the job that I would never give up, actually. And when I do eventually retire, that's probably the bit I would miss the most.
Yeah, brilliant. I love what you say there about as well, your values don't change, but potentially the way that you communicate those to the market or the way that you establish that does. And I think that's so important. And I don't know, personally, having obviously spent some time myself in Asia and worked in those markets, I think if I was to recruit a project without having lived in those markets, it would be a lot harder to know how to get my values across in the correct way to certain cultures. And yeah, I think that's really valuable advice.
Yeah, and I think you've got to recognize that the consumers are different. I mean, my children grew up in Asia and they grew up with a mobile phone. Then they grew up with the internet shopping, for instance. They didn't grow up with bricks and mortar retail like they would have done in Europe. So again, you're working with very different consumers as well as very different employees. But yeah, for me, your values are what they are. They're not flexible because they're how you believe people should be treated. But the way in which you do that can be different.
Yeah, amazing. Gary, supply chain is changing a lot, as we all know, as are the roles within it. What do you think are some of the most important skills that future supply chain leaders should be looking to develop?
So I don't know whether I'm going to be unusual. I'm not going to quote technical. Because again, if you look at my background, I've worked across many different categories, many different products, many different supply chains in different parts of the world. So it would be a fool of me to say, I got where I got because I know this, right? Because actually this doesn't necessarily apply to the next business or even the next part of the world in the same business. But so I would start back with the leadership piece. I think we are some of the biggest leaders in the organization. And I think it's super critical to recognize that that's a core part of who you are and what you are. We're surrounded by some of the most talented technical people, again, in a business. So being able to lead that technical skill, being able to get the best out of it, being able to get the new ideas and not just being good about what you did yesterday, but turning that talent to start to think about what you need tomorrow is super critical. And then I think the big connection that we can make is, what is it that the business wants? What are we after? What are we trying to deliver to the consumer? How do we turn that into a solution? And again, I often say to the teams, supply chain is beautiful in that somebody somewhere has thought of an answer, right? A fresh supply chain can take product from one side of the world to another. An ambient supply chain will tell you that it needs 60 days to get from one side to the other, right? So there's actually a solution for just about every problem you want. The challenge is to go find it and then find out whether it's worth applying or not. So again, until you understand what the business requires of you, it's very difficult to really set the vision of the supply chain, because it doesn't come from, I don't think it comes from us, right? I think the vision comes from the business objective, and then we apply the supply chain direction. Because as I say, you tell me what you want, I can give you it, because somewhere in the world, somebody's doing it. But I need to understand what you want. And then I think for me, the more I can articulate that within my teams, the more they understand the why. The more they understand the why, the more they start thinking about how we can get better in the future. If they don't understand why we're trying to do what we're doing, all I get is a good job today. If they actually get it, and I've had the pleasure of working predominantly with consumer goods. You know, my employees are consumers, so they have every right to have an opinion. They have every right to have a view on how we might improve our offer to consumers, and extracting that from them is great. And Sam, we just launched a program called Berke, which is super interesting, and we've done many. I've done many kind of ideas in terms of kind of leveraging ideas from employees' systems throughout my career, but this one is a little bit special. It started out in one of our plants in Brazil, in Manaus. It started with a plant director there actually reading a book called Ideas Generated Organization, and he rolled it out through his facility. We've just rolled that out through half our facilities last year, and we'll continue to do that. We've had just shy of 44,000 ideas, of which we've implemented 25. I know, it's amazing, right? We've implemented 25,000. And we've engaged over 8,000 people by simply unlocking their thoughts, right? And it's everything from a simple workplace improvement to a health and safety idea, to driving sustainability, to actually redesigning product where they can see efficiency or consumer improvement, to the obvious cost savings where they can, they can see more efficiency. But it spans the whole brain capability of everybody in the organization, and it's I saw your face as I said the numbers. It's been hugely impactful in year one, and we're actually just rolling it out across broader across the offices now in Berke, but super fantastic system.
I love that answer, because I think a lot of the times the conversation gets caught up in AI or machine learning and all these technical skills, which yes are important, but I think it can be easy to forget sometimes, supply chain leader, that you're a leader and you have a team of however many thousands underneath you who, if you can engage and have the right kind of leadership and the right kind of ability to get their ideas, you don't know what everyone else is thinking, but the collective power of 25,000 people is probably stronger than one.
Yeah, and I mean, AI is an interesting one, and obviously it is the talk of the town at the moment, obviously. And I've just done the Reuters conference in the US, where it was probably every 2 out of every 3 presentations did something on AI. I think my IT guy has a phrase, Graham, which says business-led, technology-enabled, which I think as well puts things very clearly in a box. Not technology-led, but I need to decide what problem I need to fix before I then look at whether AI can fix it for me, as opposed to how do I use AI. It's like, what do I need to fix, and then how do I apply the latest tools, which goes back to the vision bit, right? It's what's the problem? What does the business require of its supply chain? Right, I'll go give you a solution. I think if you do it that way, then you make sense of the application. And what I saw last week, as I said, with the topic is much more of that, right? Much more about, so 12 months ago, it would be more about AI. Here's what AI can do. Here's how we can do it. This time it was more about case studies about here's the problem we had, here's how AI has helped support us fix it, which was a super interesting way around to see it.
Yeah, amazing. Gary, a bit of a different question. I'm curious, your current role, as you said, you started taking on a second role, more on the business side of things. I've started seeing a bit more of a trend in the recent years of we are seeing chief supply chain officers start to step into business leadership roles and eventually into CEO roles. And I'm curious how you feel your background in supply chain manufacturing, supply chain leadership translates across into business leadership and the sort of key skills that you feel have carried across there as you start to step into a broader role there.
Okay. Well, I think we've always been, it's always been a hard path to follow. And I think somebody once told me, I think that's because sometimes the supply chain is the function that always says no. So you never get seen as a business enabler as such, because you're the one that potentially no for the right reasons, but sometimes no because we like to do what we're good at. I think that's changing. So I think part of the reason why it's opening up is the supply chain leaders today are we still hold some technical capability, but back to what we've talked about so far, we're much more business enabling leaders and leaders of people than just technical experts in the field that we're in. I think some of that's been helped by the cross-fertilization around categories, which didn't used to happen 20 years ago. But I also think because we carry, and post-COVID, the importance of the cost of goods, the middle of the P&L, your ability to supply in adversity and global challenges, that's becoming ever more important to the business and to people. And again, I'm going to repeat myself, but I also think we've got much better at talking business and not talking technical. So we come across as much more credible business leaders than we ever did, as opposed to the guys that just do the technical stuff. So again, and I think that, as you see talent come into the supply chain, their expectation is much more broad than it ever used to be, right? Not everybody, because you can't have everybody moving around. So you clearly a need for technical depth. But, when I look at one or two of the guys that are coming into our organization, they're clearly got aspirations and capability to go much broader than just the function that they've started in.
Amazing. In terms of people who are starting out their career, maybe someone who's 1 to 2 years into their career in supply chain, they're ambitious, they want to go far. What would your top piece of advice be to that person?
I think you've had some of it already, right? Which is remember you're a people leader, and if I know how to make a shaver or a pen or a lighter better than anybody in my organization, number one, I'm not doing my job because I won't have time to do my job. Number two, it means we're still making it in the same way as we did when I did the job. So I think it's your ability to recognize that whilst you work in a very technical function, you have experts all around you. You don't need to be the expert. What you need to do is be the guy that gets these people together and really makes it work back for the business, right? So again, we service a business and we service a more collective team in that business. We're not just about creating an excellent supply chain if we're producing things that people don't want, or we're delivering them at a time that people don't want, or we've sacrificed kind of on-shelf availability for efficiency. It's of no value to us, right? We've got to find the right balance. And I think as leaders, as you start your career, the more of the supply chain you see, and the more you connect those pieces to the rest of the business, the more effective you become as a leader. The more disconnected you are, and sometimes the more specialist you are, the harder it is to be a broader leader in this field.
Fantastic advice. And on the other side of the coin, if you were to talk to a vice president, senior vice president, someone who is one step away from a board role, a C-suite role, what advice would you give to that person?
Somebody once told me when you get to that level, you carry two bags. One is your functional bag. The other one is you're an exec. So you're there to help lead and drive the business in whatever direction the CEO or the board wish to set. And I think it's super important to understand that, there's a very famous book, What Got You Here won't get you there. There's a point in time at which the functional bag, you need to let go a little bit, and pick up the business bag and start to really work on that side of your leadership and your thinking and your strategy. Because, okay, you still run the function, you're responsible for it, and you need to deliver, and that's your ticket to the game, but that's not why you're at the table. I think that's the point at which you do the transition into a real business leader with a functional skill. But business leader first, functional skill second. And I think that's what my teams expect me to do too, right? I don't need to run my function. I have functional experts around me. I need to guide it and set a direction, but that direction should very much come from my business bag, right? Because I understand much more broadly around what we're trying to achieve and where we're trying to get to.
No, brilliant. I think some really, really good advice for a lot of different people there. So look, Gary, thank you so much for your time. Yeah, really, really interesting conversation, and I really appreciate you joining me.
No, my pleasure, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you very much.